Welcome to a special episode of the Future Mobility Podcast. I'm joined by a second-time guest here, Michael Wiesinger from Kodiak. And I don't typically talk about more breaking news or more kind of timely topics intentionally, and that I try to cover the quest for safer, more sustainable, more effective, more accessible transportation. How do we make mobility better? And kind of I don't usually like talking about kind of the ebbs and flows of the day news cycles. This is a different situation in which I wanted to talk to Michael specifically about some recent news from Kodiak, because I think this is so important to some of the key themes in the quest for safer and more effective transportation. And yeah, we'll set the stage there, and we can get deeper. So Michael, appreciate you joining. Would you mind just giving a quick overview, just for anyone who isn't familiar, if you haven't heard the previous episode when you joined? Who is Kodiak? What's this news that you broke recently?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me, Brandon. Always a pleasure to be on your podcast. So Kodiak is a developer of autonomous trucking technology, meaning fully operational without a driver. That's what we are working on. We have historically worked on mostly the over-the-road long-haul trucking use case. That was our focus. Then also in 2022, actually started working with the Department of Defense to work on a use case and to apply our technology for them. And now most recently, and this is the announcement we are talking about here last week, is really going into what we call the industrial logistics segment. So we announced a partnership with Atlas Energy Solutions, where we are deploying the autonomous trucks with our technology for their operations in the West Permian in Texas. So what does this exactly mean? What have we exactly announced? The announcement was, first of all, we have entered this long-term partnership, and we have already operated fully driverless runs for them. So this is actually entering a completely new era of autonomous driving, because we're moving away from research, from piloting to actual commercial deployments. And so by the end of this year, we will actually deliver the first Atlas-owned trucks to Atlas, and those will go into operation beginning of next year, 24/7 operations for Atlas.
Cool. Yeah, and when you say industrial logistics, so if you wouldn't mind unpacking that a bit. So what's the use case that you're solving here, and then this isn't an area I think that the average person, you can see long haul trucks on the road, you drive next to them all the time. I think this is an aspect of the society and economy that most people don't have daily access to. So what are the use cases and the types of problems that you're solving here?
When we talk about industrial logistics, we think about it as different sub-verticals. The one we are starting on right now is really hauling mineral, or we call it mineral transport. In Atlas's use case, it is actually sand that is hauled between a sand plant and well sites. But there are also other use cases when you think about industrial logistics, is really any mined materials, transporting those from, be it from a mine to a port, or be it from a mine to, some other kind of processing facility. You can also think about that a little bit further. For example, logging, right? That's another use case where there's a lot of trucks and a lot of drivers operating in very remote areas. And that's really also the thing that we are solving for Atlas, right? This is very remote operations. It is very hard to actually deploy trucks there with drivers, because nobody is living there, right? So everyone has to fly there, everyone has to fly in and fly out. You have to find housing. It's not a very pleasant job from a driver perspective, and so it's very, very hard to staff those. And so really when we talk about mineral transport or industrial logistics, it's all of those areas that are kind of remote, that have a driver shortage, that have, some safety concerns as well, because with a driver shortage, typically there comes safety concerns. And we are trying to solve those use cases for them, automate those trucks so they can operate it 24/7 without a driver.
Cool. And not to turn the back on the over-the-road long-haul trucking, because that's still a super exciting industry and area where you're going to provide impact here. But what is it? And you already mentioned at least one of them. But what are the main things where you have increased benefit in the short term for this industrial logistics? So you mentioned the difficulty of getting drivers to specific area, but I think there's even more to it than that. Could you unpack like what are the key drivers of why this is such a positive for your customer?
Yeah, definitely the most important one is the driver shortage, right? In order to keep those industrial operations running, you actually want to have trucks running 24/7, right? So it's not like one shift or it's not 50 hours or whatever work week. It's really 24/7 operations. And in order to do that, you need several drivers to be there and several drivers to always be there, right? And we all know humans, call in sick, or humans, have things come up, so they can actually not attend to their jobs. And so it's very, very hard to staff those kind of jobs and to retain those kind of jobs. You need to think about those are rough roads, right? This is not like highway driving and, you sit in a cab and everything is perfectly climatized and everything is perfect around you. It's really ruggedized environment. And so it's very, very hard to get those drivers and to retain them. The second thing, of course, is safety concerns, right? There are accidents happening on those private roads, just like they are on public roads, right? And so really with autonomous trucks, with those trucks that are always attentive, that always have a 360-degree view of the environment around them, you can, of course, mitigate a lot of those things. Driver distraction, we all know that's an issue with passenger vehicle drivers like us, and just like with truck drivers, right? An autonomous truck obviously is always attentive, right? And so those are really the main reasons. In addition, if you think about general automation, of course, if you take out the human element, things become more deterministic, right? Because an autonomous truck will always do what you tell it to do, while the driver could always, take a different route or go faster or over the speed limit and do things, that they just do because we are humans and we are emotional. An autonomous truck doesn't do those things, and so this is another big benefit for Atlas, but also for other industrial partners.
And I'd appreciate your help kind of connecting the dots and letting me know. You know this space obviously far better than I do, so I'm trying to put together a mental model here that makes sense. And what's coming to mind is kind of a 3-sided Venn diagram of in that sweet spot. There is the one circle is an area where there's a real need, right? It's not someone who's trying to deploy autonomous tech for the sake of it. It's someone who has a real problem, has a business need, and they have something, they can't get the people that they need. They're driving 24/7 operation, for example. Like they to make money, to generate revenue, they need to solve this problem. The second area is the technology can do it. Like the technology actually works to solve that need. And the third is that there's a support ecosystem that works, right? So like 2 of those isn't enough. If you have the technology that can really solve the issue and solve a need on highways, but you have regulatory issues or something that prevents you from operating, you can't operate. And if the technology doesn't work, you obviously can't operate. And if you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't actually result in dollars and cents benefits, then you have cool pilots that look nice on the news and stuff, but don't actually scale and turn into something. And it feels like on the surface, and of course I don't have nearly the detail that you do, but we mentioned, you're solving a real problem. The technology, of course, there's new challenges that are introduced. These aren't paved roads, right? There's environments that are changing. There's things, but they seem like more manageable challenges to solve than the difficulties that come from passenger vehicles and uncertainty on the road. And then the regulatory environment and the rest of the ecosystem seems to be simpler because it's on private roads as opposed to public roads. Does any of that resonate with how you're thinking about that? Or where does that framework make sense? Or what am I missing?
I think you're actually spot on with that framework. Maybe let's take a step back and let's start with the passenger vehicle use case, right? That's where all of the autonomous driving development is actually coming from. And most of the companies initially, Waymo and others, focused on this because it was more of the shiny object, right? And people wanted to understand what's possible from a technology perspective. How far can we take this? And then at some point, people start, like Don, our CEO and founder, started thinking about, well, how can we build a business out of that technology? How is this not just cool in terms of development, right? And that's really where Kodiak started in 2018 with the focus on autonomous trucking. Now, over the course of the years, there's been tremendous progress in autonomous trucking, right? I mean, we have been doing this for 5 years, and we are so close to deploying, of course, over-the-road trucking. But also what we realized is we built our stack in a way that is super fungible and flexible and can be applied to other use cases. Right? So really when we started with the Department of Defense in 2022, we saw how well our system generalizes and how well it actually also works. You already mentioned that where there isn't maybe a paved road with perfectly done lane lines, right? But actually in kind of an off-highway environment where there might not be anything, right? Where it might just be completely without any lane marking, without any roads, without, just going through the desert, for example, right? And so we realized that by working with the Department of Defense. And then really last year, we basically had some inbounds from other companies in that industrial space. And we realized there's this big opportunity with Atlas to solve a real problem and to solve that today. Right? There's no regulatory uncertainty. There's nothing that we are waiting for or have to wait for. And so we said, this is the perfect use case to really build a business here and to really bring a product to the market, to deploy a product into customers' hands, right? This is why this is so significant. By the end of this year, we will deliver the first trucks to the customer. They are owned by Atlas. They are operated with our technology, fully without a driver, but it is in their hands, right? And this is a complete step change for the industry. Nobody has done this before. And so we realized, this is a real product that we can deliver sooner than an autonomous trucking product for over-the-road trucking. And it's a perfect stepping stone. Why am I saying this? Because we are still going through the entire process as if we would deploy over the road, right? We do the safety case analysis. We need to set up all the support processes, the infrastructure, and the 24/7 remote monitoring of the truck to make sure we can always support if there's anything that the truck needs. All of those things will be deployed now in that private road environment first, and then applied to over-the-road long-haul trucking. So it's really, we see this as a stepping stone that allows us to generate revenues early on, to further improve the product and to further improve how we deploy this kind of product.
Yeah, I think a lot of that makes sense. And it's exciting, like I mentioned, to see and hear what's going on. Like maybe the last question I had was, and I don't know how much you can talk about this, but if you can pick kind of one or two areas. So of course, there are different conditions off roads, right? We talk about the road, the lack of lane lines. It's probably not GPS at times. It's uncertain. Not only are the roads not marked, you also don't know if you're going to drive on the same road today or that you are going to tomorrow, with sand moving things around. Sand's messy, gets into crevices if there's any crevices, maybe clogs up sensors. There's NVH profiles different than what you're going to see on the road. If bumpy things are shaky, I'm sure I'm just scratching the surface here, but the different boundary conditions do result in new requirements for the system. Are there any specific areas that you guys really had to focus on to convince yourself and your customer that the product actually can execute at scale in this environment?
Yes, definitely. So you mentioned a couple things, which is that the roads always change. So there's actually two areas, right? First of all, the destination changes, right? Like every couple of weeks, the destination actually changes and you need to go somewhere else. So you cannot say, oh, okay, we need to go to a new destination. Let us go back and do 6 months of work and then we can go to a new destination, right? Like you get a couple days heads up and then you need to be able to handle that. And with the approach that we have taken at Kodiak, not using high definition maps, using a really low level, or we call it a sparse map, that actually allows us to do that, right? And so this was one thing. The other thing was really making sure that you actually perceive live what's the drivable surface, right? Not rely on whatever map you have created before, but really perceive live. Because yesterday, the road might have looked a little bit different than it is today because, there was wind, there might have been rain, and there might have even somebody regraded the road between yesterday and today. And so you need to say, life. Oh, these are my edges. These are my road boundaries. This is where I'm driving. And Kodiak has perfected that. And that obviously really resonated with the customer. So the first time we showed up with our truck, the system basically worked out of the box. And that is really the proof in the pudding, right? Actually show them, hey, this works. We have built our system in a way that can actually solve how you want to operate. And that is really what resonated, and I think what allowed Kodiak to form and build that long-term partnership with Atlas.
Cool. Yeah, makes sense. So, and anything I'm missing, or anything specific that you want to get across?
No, I think, first of all, thanks so much for the opportunity to come on your podcast. This is an really extremely exciting time for Kodiak, for the industry, the first real commercial deployment of this technology. So stay tuned for the rest of the year as there's more news coming out, and thanks so much for having me.
Cool. Thanks, Michael. Really appreciate it, and best of luck to you and Kodiak.
Thanks,